Anyhow, I went through about a year and a half where basically I lived on nothing but human blood and Catholic communion wafers. That's all I ate.
Meet Bill Schnoebelen, a man who has been many things and has worn many hats in his entire career that has been made up completely in his own vivid imagination. Among some of the qualifying titles that he has carried, he's been a vampire, sustaining himself on blood and wafers for a year and a half. He could have been a werewolf, but he chose to be a vampire instead. He trained as a Druid under a master chief Druid of North America something. He was initiated as a witch by someone in England, and yet he lived in the United States in 1968, and yet his book says 1973. He was also a Catholic priest. He was a Mason. He was a Mormon. He was defiled by demons on the night of Halloween. I dare say there is nothing in this entire world that this man has not experienced, either on this plane or in some other imaginary plane. So how did this man do so many fantastic things and live such an incredible life, and yet has no witnesses or any evidence or any facts to support any of this? We're going to look at that in this. We are going to travel to this place. Our next stop, the batshit crazy zone.
You're traveling through to another dimension. A dimension of not only paranoia and delusion, but of idiocy. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of pure ignorance. Your next stop, the batshit crazy zone.
Thank you all for tuning in to NYSTV. I'm your host, John Pounders, and as always, I'm humbled to be able to do this, and I'm really thankful for my subscribers and the people that watch this show. Today we have an amazing guest. His name is Willaim Schnoebelen, and his testimony is probably one of the most impressive ones I've ever heard.
This man's testimony is one of the most imaginative, creative stories I've ever heard, but I'm going to let you hear for yourself.
He exposes deep secrets from the occult underworld like no one else I've ever heard before.
Actually, John, he's giving his opinion on the occult. He has absolutely nothing to support any of this. He has no documentation. He has no evidence. He has no facts. He has absolutely nothing.
I mean, he really has been involved deeply in Freemasonry. I believe he'll tell you what degree it was, but well over 33rd degree. Bill, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here. Hallelujah.
Yeah, man, I'm so excited to hear more about your testimony. I mean, I've heard many videos on what you speak of, and man, I'm just so excited to hear more about it. And I know that my listeners will be excited to hear. So I don't want to talk too long because I know that your testimony is very extensive and it reaches very deep. And so I'm going to go ahead and let you get started, man. Tell us about yourself.
Well, basically, I've been saved since 1984. But before that, I was in a wide variety of things. I started out as a Catholic, a very devout young Catholic, raised in a very devout home. As you can probably tell by the color of my hair, I'm an older fellow I was raised as a child in the 50s. And back when the Catholic Church was still very traditional and Latin and all that kind of stuff. And anyhow, I thought I was going to be a priest. I wanted to serve God more than anything.
So I just want to point something out here, which is kind of very important to understand throughout this whole story that he's about to give. He wanted to become a priest. He wanted to serve God. So let me repeat that. He wanted to become a priest and serve God. And this is the path he chose.
And Basically, the first thing that really happened that kind of knocked me off course is I was out on Halloween night one year. And back then, you never heard anything about Halloween being bad. Certainly not in the Catholic Church, because as we've documented in some of our videos and teachings, it's basically the Catholics that brought Halloween to America about 120 years ago. Because originally Halloween was actually illegal. The founding fathers had it illegal.
All Hallows Eve, yes, is a Catholic holiday. It is the holy evening before All Saints' Day. It was never illegal in this country. The Puritans, you said the founding fathers, I assume you mean the Puritans. The Puritans did not celebrate Christmas. They did not celebrate Halloween. They did not celebrate almost every holiday. They were Puritans. They didn't celebrate any of that. And Halloween, as it came to America, took on the other cultures and the other practices of the many people who came to this country. Trick-or-treating came from the old world, from souling. The idea of dressing up in costumes is very much an American adaptation.
But anyway, I was out trick-or-treating, and beautiful October night, lived in a small town in rural Iowa. And essentially, I looked up in the sky at one point, and the sky was full of black things. They looked like black, leathery things. And it was like being in a cave full of bats. That's the only way I can really describe it. And I just froze. I was terrified. And these things looked at me with ruby red eyes, and I felt this chill go through me.
So you were walking around on Halloween night. I assume it's dark and you're in a area where there's a lot of houses so you can get candy, and then you saw all these demons flying around. And there was no other witnesses to this. You were the only one who saw that. Even though it was Halloween, there were probably other parents and other kids going around trick-or-treating at that same time in that same area. But for some reason, you were the only one who saw this. And this did not scare you or frighten you in any way whatsoever. You didn't run home to mommy.
And I know now, many years later, obviously, that I was defiled at that moment by something from the dark side, something from evil, from Lucifer.
So not only did you see demons flying around, but you were defiled by them?
And I was walking with a friend, and he kept going, and he said, "Hey, Bill, what are you doing?" And I looked at him, and I looked back, and all of it was gone. It was another clear night, starry night.
Oh, so it was most likely some kind of a sugar-induced hallucination.
But from that time on, you see, I started looking into the occult. I started being drawn.
I thought you wanted to become a priest and serve God.
From being, because of course, back in those days, you got to understand there was really nothing about the occult out there. I mean,
actually, Bill, back then there were a lot of books on the occult. There were books on the occult going back to 1800s and even before then. So there were books, and maybe not as readily available as they are today, but if you knew somebody, you could get a hold of occult books. And often at times people would share books and people would copy out of those books. So you still would have been able to get occult books.
Unless you live in a big city, and went into some old musty bookstore, you couldn't find anything. There was no Barnes and Noble, at least that I ever heard of. Well, anyway, what happened is I went on to college. I was going to minor seminary college to become a priest.
So you went to seminary to study to become a priest, okay? So far that seems to fit your story because you still wanted to serve God, and so here you are now in seminary to become a priest, okay? So far this sounds like a legitimate story.
And all this time, I kind of had a side interest in like UFOs and parapsychology and haunted houses, all of these things that are kind of at the outer, if you will, the outer innocent, quote unquote, fringe of the occult.
Really, Bill? You were into some fringe stuff? How unusual.
And I had a professor, a theology, a doctor, and a priest. theological doctor, tell me, one of my teachers, that if I wanted to be Christ-like, which of course a priest is supposed to be Christ-like, I should study the occult, because that's what, the Lord did. This guy, I never heard any of this, he told me that, Jesus, quote unquote, went to India to study with the gurus, and he went to Tibet to study with the lamas, and he went to, Egypt to study with the magicians there. And that's how he was able to do all this stuff he was able to do. Well, what did I know? I was like 18 or 19 years old. I didn't know the Bible very well, of course, because I was a Catholic.
So a professor at your school suggested you study the occult to become closer to God.
And I believed the guy. And so I started studying the occult. And within a couple of years, by the time I was like a sophomore at this college, I wrote to the king of the witches over in England and asked to become a witch.
So you wrote to the king of the witches to become a witch, and this witch was in England. And you were around age 18 to 19, so this would have been around 1968. There was already a rather famous witch who came to America around 1968. So let's just assume that the king of the witches over in England, you contacted him and he made you a witch somehow. You do realize that even back then, although I'm sure that he probably initiated a lot of people, it was still face to face. There was no way that you could write to somebody and ask to be initiated through the mail. They didn't do it that way, and they still don't do it that way today. The only way to be initiated into a witch coven is to go to that coven and ask to be initiated. And even then, it's up to whoever it is to either initiate you or not. There was no way you could do a mail course to get initiated.
So I was studying for the Catholic priesthood, but I also was studying to be a witch. And I got initiated in 1968.
In your book, Wicca, the Satan's Little White Lie, which I happen to find as a very curious title for your book, you claim to have been initiated by a lady in 1968 in Boston and not through the mail to the King of the Witches in England in 1968. So, which is it? Is it 1968 lady in Boston, or is it 1968 King of the Witches? Which one is it, Bill? You have to choose one. You can't do both.
As a witch.
So you were initiated. So you traveled all the way to England to be initiated because, again, as I mentioned earlier, initiations are face-to-face.
And then I took a leave of absence from the Catholic Church, from the seminary after I graduated from college with a degree in music and education philosophy. And
so how did becoming a witch help you to serve God in any way, shape, or form? Unless what you actually wanted to do was to find out about witchcraft so that later on you could use it against them to save people and speak out against them.
I went off and went to Boston, where the nearest coven was at that time, to become a high priest.
I'm not sure what year this is, as you claim to have been initiated in 1973, which would have made much more sense because this is when you had engaged in a mail order correspondence with the Church of Wicca, which was run by Yvonne and Gavin Frost at the time. However, they did not offer any initiations, and there was no record of you being initiated by them.
In Wicca, which is white witchcraft. And then from there, the problem with the occult is it's never enough. Occultism, magical power is like a drug, is what I tell people. And you get a little, you want more. You get more, you want a little more. And it keeps going.
What? The occult is some kind of a drug? Like there's people who study the occult out turning tricks so they can buy more books to read because they're jonesing for a fix? What are you talking about?
And that's how the devil works with any addiction. And I would submit to you that magical power, which is real, it comes from the demonic, but it's totally real, that it's one of the most addictive things of all because it gives you the illusion you have control over your life, even though you don't. because obviously you're a slave to Lucifer.
If anything, occultists are well aware of their own self-development and their own agency.
You're a slave to the evil one, but you don't care, He just chews you up and spits you out. So anyway, went down to Arkansas to study under the Grand Master Druid of North America.
There was no Grand Master Druid of North America in 1973, and nobody would have assumed such a pompous title, and definitely no one would have given such a pompous title to someone. In 1973, there was an organization called RDNA, which was Reformed Druids of North America, which was the precursor to nDraiocht, Fein, or ADF today, which formed in 1984. The only other Druid organization in 1973 was the Order of Bards, Ovaites, and Druids in England, which has absolutely no title close to the Grand Master Druid of North America or any other continent. The chosen chief in 1973 was Ross Nichols, and again, this was the Order of Bards, Ovaites, and Druids in England, and the highest title which Ross Nichols held was Chief Druid. Whoever this Grand Master Druid of North America was, he was a fraud, a charlatan, and was feeding you bullshit. And neither RDNA through ADF or the Order of Bards, Ovaites, and Druids in England has any record of you being a member. Whoever this guy was, he was obviously full of shit, giving himself a grandiose title to make himself feel better, and played you like a chump.
And he told me he was a 33rd degree Mason. He was also a Mormon bishop. And he told me that if I wanted to really understand the mysteries of Lucifer, I should become a Master Mason. And he told me if I ever got in any kind of serious spiritual trouble, I should join the Mormon Church.
So we're moving away from bashing witches and Druids and Catholics, and now we're going to bash and disparage Mormons.
So I kind of, filed the latter part away because I knew nothing about the Mormon Church. I mean, all I knew they had a choir and they had a lot of wives. That's what I thought,
Right.
So anyway, went through this. I was now in the 70s.
Wait, so now we're in the 70s? This is not following the timeline from your book. Yeah, I guess it's hard to keep all of these things in check.
I got involved with the Church of Satan.
Honestly, I was wondering when you were going to throw Satanists into the mix, so this should be much more entertaining than the demon defiling you story.
I got involved with hardcore Satanism. I got involved with even the vampire thing, because at one point I had to, if I wanted to progress within the kingdom of darkness, within the brotherhood, as it's called, of Satan, I had to choose. I could either go one way and become a lycanthrope or a werewolf, or I could go the other way and become a vampire.
What? So basically you had to choose between Team Jacob or Team Edward? And you chose Team Edward?
I chose to become a vampire because it seemed, sexier somehow.
Yeah, I'm not seeing you as a sexy vampire, Bill.
And so anyhow, I went through about a year and a half where basically I lived on nothing but human blood and Catholic communion wafers. That's all I ate. Okay. Okay, so
Okay, so you lived for a year and a half off of nothing but human blood and wafers. Oh, man. Please continue.
Wow. And, well, then something amazing happened. Every year I was sending a check to the Church of Satan that get their newsletter. Believe it or not, they had a newsletter then, and I'm sure it's now online, but it was called the Cloven Hoof. And I got the check back from the bank, and some lady in the bank out at San Francisco, where the Church of Satan did its banking at that time, had written on the check, "I'll be praying for you in Jesus' name."
So a bank teller in San Francisco defaced a check that you had written to a business and then returned it to you?
And of course, I just laughed at it because at that point I was so deceived. I thought that Yahushua, Jesus Christ, was the son of Satan.
How long were you in that seminary school for?
He had died on the cross as a human sacrifice to save the world from the evil Jehovah. Yeah. That's what I was taught.
Gnosticism, basically, yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. Kind of the whole demiurge thing. So, and by the way, I was also a Gnostic bishop.
Okay, yeah, so you're a Gnostic bishop. Okay, so because you're a witch, a Druid, a Mormon, Catholic, and a Gnostic bishop, and a Satanist. Gotcha.
So I know all what you're talking about. You're talking about Gnosticism, but that was a couple of years before this. So anyway, I just laughed at this check, threw it in the bank, and within a couple of days, I was flattened.
So you laughed and you threw the check into the bank. So do you mean that the Church of Satan wrote you a check and then the teller defaced it and gave it to you? Why didn't the Church of Satan just, instead of sending the check to the bank to send to you, why didn't they just send it to you directly? And if this check was returned, which might be the case, if you wrote a check to the Church of Satan and it bounced, and it came back to you, or came back to the teller, and then the teller defaced the check, and then gave it to you, or returned it to you, and then you threw it in the bank. Okay, I'm missing something here, but first of all, bank tellers should not be defacing checks like that. The only person who should be writing anything on a check is you. No one else, especially a bank teller, worth anything, and if they want to keep their job, is not defacing any checks.
It's like all my magical power left me. I lost my job. I felt sick as a dog. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was one of the most powerful magicians, sorcerers, whatever word you want to use, in the whole western coast of Lake Michigan.
No, you were not. Back then, and still even today, nobody ranks people by power. There were a lot of very famous witches back then. There was Isaac Bonewitz, wasn't really a witch, but he was definitely very well known in the pagan community and the Druid organization. There was Raymond Buckland, Margot Adler, and a whole bunch of other people who were famous, but they weren't considered power. Nobody assigned levels of power to anybody back then. And unfortunately, Bill, one of the serious mistakes that you made is that you have referenced all of this back to the early 1970s, where basically almost every single pagan, witch, and druid knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody else. And luckily, the people who are still around today, we can contact and we can ask them, and through our own network, we can find out who was who, when, and where back then. And honestly, Bill, so far, a lot of your stories are not checking out.
This time I was living in Milwaukee, and I didn't know what was going on, so I asked Lucifer for a sign.
So you were supposedly a witch. A witch and witches do not believe in Satan or Lucifer. You're also a Druid, again, which does not believe in Satan or Lucifer. And now you are a Satanist. So I assume that you contacted Levian Satanists in San Francisco who are atheistic. So why would you be praying to Satan? Or why would you be praying to Lucifer? Bill, I'm thinking that when those demons defiled you on that Halloween night, that you were severely scarred. Coupled that with you surviving off of human blood and wafers for a year and a half, somehow kind of messed with your mind a little bit, and maybe you got some of this wrong.
And another amazing thing happened, because what happened is the next day I got a phone call.
Oh, good. The story continues.
From these two girls that live down in Chicago, which is a short, train ride up from down. They're down. We're up in Milwaukee. Right. And they want to know if they can come and visit me because I was this great satanic priest and blah, 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 all of that. And so I said, sure. They said they had something to give me as an offering. And I thought, well, whatever, So they came, and when they got in the door, they were like two teenage girls that worship the devil. And, what was really bizarre is they gave me these two Christian comic books about the occult. They were from Chick Publications. One was called Spellbound, and the other one is called Angel of Light. And they were both about the dangers of the occult.
Well, this is the end of part 1. I will put out part 2 next Friday. Thank you so much, and blessed be. Okay, so you live for a year and a half off of nothing but human blood and wafers.